Welcome to EV Hub Live. EV Hub Live is a live video podcast for public policy professionals working to advance transportation electrification. EV Hub Live is recorded live, so to tune in and ask questions or check the schedule, please visit atlasevhub.com/live. In this episode of EV Hub Live, Nick Nigro will sit down with Katherine Stainken of Plug-in America, Kellen Schefter of the Edison Electric Institute, and Jamie Hall from General Motors to discuss a new paper from the Alliance for Transportation Electrification in Plug-in America that calls consumer education and outreach by electric utilities the, quote, missing piece, unquote, for transportation electrification. This episode is produced by Peter Benzoni and Connor Smith of Atlas Public Policy.
Hey, thanks, Peter. Welcome, everybody, to EV Hub Live. Excited to have everyone here. We have a lot to talk about with education outreach, but since we're doing this live and Jamie's company broke some sweet news, we're going to go right to that. Jamie, why don't you tell us a little bit about what General Motors just announced to everyone today?
Yeah, so it's been a pretty exciting month for GM. I think you may have seen earlier this month we announced significant increase in EV investments. We're going to invest $27 billion in electric and autonomous vehicles in the coming years, with 30 new models coming by 2025. And today we announced support for the Paris Climate Agreement by setting a science-based target, going carbon neutral by 2040, and really working towards a goal of eliminating tailpipe emissions from new vehicles by 2035. So we're all in on electric. It's going to take a village to get there. I think that's part of what we're here to discuss today. I don't know, Nick, if there's more detail you want me to go into, but I think the key takeaway here is there are a lot more EVs coming across the industry and more market segments. This is a real turning point for this industry, I think, and we're getting beyond the early adopter and really need to figure out how to capture the entire market. So exciting time, an inflection point.
Yeah, for real. It's been wild to see all the developments from the industry in the last couple months, particularly since the election. Jamie's company's been really busy making announcements and commitments, and this latest one, I think, is a really big deal, and it's moving the market. Certainly your stock is reacting well to it. And so that's a good sign for the industry. So to get people to buy these things, I think we need to do more with education and outreach, which is the main topic for today's show. And I want to dive right into this paper that was put together by Plug-in America and the Alliance for Transportation Electrification. So I'm hoping, Katherine, Kellen, Jamie, why don't you tell us, we'll start with you, Katherine. Why did you write this paper, and what's the main message?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for inviting us to be here today to talk to you all. I think, Jamie, with that announcement that came out today, that's the perfect setting for all of this, and that the future is electric, right? The future of transportation is electric. And so there's been a lot of work done to address various barriers in terms of making that transition to transportation electrification. There's been, great things done with EV infrastructure thus far, but still one of the remaining barriers to greater adoption of these vehicles is the education and outreach of consumers, of fleet managers, of so many different stakeholders and players. And so that's kind of where we started from with this paper. And then going from there, looking at education outreach is the barrier, but then who are the right players to get involved in that? And what kind of education do consumers need? And so that's where the utility really comes in. And they're the missing piece here, that we need greater involvement by utilities to educate their consumers, educate the fleet managers, get them on the right charging rates, let them know about programs that are out there. And so that's kind of where we came from with creating this paper.
Kellen, what about you?
Yeah, well, let me start by actually just picking up on the General Motors announcement, which it is awesome timing here to have you on, Jamie. And I actually recall from the other side of EEI's business, we work a lot with large corporate customers on their own energy procurement. And for years, General Motors has actually had pretty aggressive goals to reduce emissions from their own operations, right? So the energy that they buy from electric companies or through PPAs or whatever, they've had strong goals for renewable energy for a long time, but they hadn't had a similar goal for their actual product, right? Which is the vehicles. And I remember probing folks at GM, hey, you have a renewable energy goal, but not like an actual EV goal, right? And I think it reflects like where we are in the market. It was easier for large corporations to see a pathway to 100% renewable energy a few years ago than it was to 100% EV, for example. And now we're at that point where the technology and the economics are actually aligning, where this is the first major, car company we're seeing make an announcement like that. And I'm just so excited that it's finally here. But I think it dovetails perfectly with what we're talking about on the education piece with large corporate customers. They are these large entities that buy lots of energy. And so they actually are a really powerful single customer that can define with their decisions, what their footprint looks like from a carbon standpoint. With passenger cars, it's millions of individual decisions that are happening, right? Which car do you buy? Why are you buying that vehicle? And so the whole point of this, I think, piece is to demonstrate that we actually need to not just work with a few large corporate customers, we need to work with all customers to get this message out there. And if we really believe that, electrification is the pathway, cleaning the grid and then enabling that clean grid to decarbonize transportation, we really need to be, all oriented in the same direction here to get that message out to the broadest set of customers that we can.
Jamie, what's your take on this paper? Why is it important? What's the main message from your perspective?
I think the main message from our perspective is we need everyone in to make this work. Automakers, we're doing what we do best, which is bring more and more and better EVs to market. We're doing more and more advertising. We're doing a lot of education outreach online. But this is different than traditional traditional vehicle advertising. You're not just making an emotional appeal. You're trying to sell something that is fundamentally different in some ways. So you're having to not just advertise a product, but do actual education. And we see utilities as really important partners in this effort. It's not because we don't talk about things like charging ourselves. It's because we need all the help that we can get. And I think utilities are particularly well suited to speak to some aspect of the electrification transition, particularly things like electricity rates and charger installation and whatnot. So we have long supported a utility role in education and outreach, and think it's important that utilities continue to be able to play that role.
So let me start with some of my devil's advocate questions. And now I'm going to start with picking right up where you left off there. So you're saying utilities are in a good spot to talk about rates and charging and stuff like that. Why would you say that automakers themselves are not best positioned to do that? And why is it better for the utilities to do it? Or why is it helpful for the utilities to do it in addition to what you're doing?
Yeah, I'd say it's more the latter. We do talk about electricity and what kind of charging can you do where, and how do we put in a charger at home. But it's kind of hard to break through the noise here. So first of all, we just need more voices. EVs have been around for a long time, but still, if you look at surveys, people don't know that much about them. People don't know a lot of these basics. So we just need more messengers. Utilities have existing relationships. They're already seen by their existing customer base as experts on electricity and related issues. And then things like rates. We can talk at a high level about electricity rates and considerations there, but you have thousands of different utilities all coming at this slightly differently. So the ability of a utility to speak to its own customers about the options available in their service territory, the rates available in their service territory, it's really valuable, and I think it complements what we have to say, and I think it's going to require all of the above, especially to go as fast as we all want to go.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, I think there's the sales funnel for the purchasing this vehicle, right? But at the end of the day, we're selling electricity as the fuel now and no longer gasoline. And so who is selling that electricity? Well, that is the utility. And so that's really why, main takeaway there about why they're so needed right now for this education and outreach component.
Kellen, you're the utility guy here. Make the case.
Yeah. Well, no, first of all, let me say to Jamie's point there, we do need all voices here. I don't think any of us are saying it should only be automakers or only utilities or only like independent nonprofits or whatever. It should really be all of these. And actually, sometimes part of the reason this paper, Catherine, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but we were seeing some commissions across the country. And you know, for your viewers, probably aware, electric companies that are regulated at the state level by commissions have to go and get their investments approved, right, by a utility commission. Often these proposals will include a big chunk of money, a good budget for broad mass education and awareness. And then sometimes the commission will cut that back a little bit and say, well, we don't really see the electric company role in that. Why aren't that's kind of the role for automakers, right? And I think part of the point of this paper that we want to say is we agree with automakers that we actually all need to be communicating more about this, right? It's not either or. It's like there's just not nearly enough information out there. So we really need that ability to do that. But you're absolutely right. I mean, Catherine, to your point around at the end of the funnel is the vehicle ownership, but for the electric company, at the end of the funnel is a electric user, right? And how they use that electricity is going to be really, really important. So I think one of the other key points of this message is we need to get everyone in that funnel so that at the end of the day, they're using the product, electricity, in a way that's actually good for the grid, good for all customers, right? It is different, right? And I think one of the things different about electricity is most of the charging for a lot of the population, if you have a single family home with a garage, you're basically all set, right? There's not a lot of additional work you need to cover most of your charging needs. But we want to make sure that you have that ability to manage the charging so it's beneficial to the grid. And so that's a key role for the electric company. But the point is we need everyone moving through that funnel at the very top to be aware of the vehicle. But then when they get the vehicle and how they're charging, we need to be engaged there. And that's really where that electric company role really needs to be strongest.
So we've got a number of folks who are watching us on YouTube. And if you have a question, feel free to throw it into the chat, and we'll try to field it as we're going live. So I want to keep going a little bit more with this devil's advocate, and I'm gonna pick on you, Kellen, because there is some critique that maybe the advertising abilities or education and outreach abilities of electric utilities, perhaps NGOs and others might not be so they might not be all stars at it, let's just say. And some are even saying that utilities are self-serving. This is for them. So why are they able to do this with ratepayer funds? Why don't you hit that critique and tell us a little bit why you think it's not a fair criticism?
Sure. Well, let me caveat this by saying our conversation today is not geared for, I think, the broad mass market, right? So what I'm about to say is not maybe like the message I would use to actual broad EV buyers out there.
Don't worry, the general public is not watching this.
Okay. Good. But what I mean by that is, if on the self-serving point, right? If you believe that EVs are good for the climate, which we do, and I think we all would agree there, we need to get these out there as fast as possible. That's like the big picture objective we're trying to achieve here. But actually, when it comes to, do electric companies make more money by selling electricity? That actually isn't as simple as it sounds. Electric companies tend to make money by earning on capital investment. The additional throughput from sales from EVs is actually a way they can help keep rates down while they're investing in the grid. We address this in the paper. It's a kind of a wonky point, but the point is that this is actually good for all electric company customers if we can get more EVs charging, particularly when it's at times that aren't adding more costs to the grid. So that's the first point. But on the earlier point around, are we well suited to this? Jamie, I think you mentioned in when we were getting going here around Flex Your Power in California. There actually is good precedent for electric companies being fairly good at getting the word out there. A couple other examples on energy efficiency. These are often energy efficiency programs in states are often branded. I'm thinking of like Empower in Maryland, or there's other examples out there where, some electric company customers generally know the brand of the energy efficiency program. So they know to buy that, more efficient washing machine or dishwasher or whatever, right? So there is actually some good precedent out there for getting the word out there. It doesn't need to be spectacular. We're not maybe going to blow the people away like GM could with a Super Bowl commercial. But I think at getting kind of those fundamental messages out there, we can be very effective.
Yeah, Catherine, speaking of these messages, your organization represents the interests of the drivers, and so how are they going to benefit from this from your point of view? When Kellen's talking about grid management, keeping rates low for people, what does this have to do with drivers, and why should they care?
Yeah, I mean, I think it comes back again that like electricity is the new fuel now, and that they need to know. I mean, the questions that drivers have now, for sure, the top of the sales funnel, there's the questions about, well, what car is right for me? What are the features? And that's where Jamie and the dealers come in. But then as you're moving down that sales funnel, you need to know, where to charge, how to charge. What does this mean for my electricity rates at home? What does this mean for my bill? What is that going to look like? And so those are all the questions that drivers are having now. And there was a stat that we put in the paper there that about 78% of Americans think that finding an EV charging station is at least kind of moderately difficult. And so, and understanding how to charge going along with that 78% there. So these are kind of the, and there you can see on the screen there too, kind of more reasons why utilities are needed to help out the drivers at the end of the day, understand all things about charging and making that transition to the lifestyle of driving electric.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Speaking of lifestyle and changing, a lot has happened in the last 10 years or so since we started working in this space. And what we've had to do, or what companies and others have had to do to educate consumers, have changed a lot. So we've got a couple of videos to kind of illustrate that. Peter, if you could cue up the first one, we'll watch what it was like in the beginning of the market.
Change. You can resist it, be left behind, or embrace it and move forward.
We're driving it
everywhere.
We emit optimism, not exhaust.
We plug in our vehicles as naturally as we charge our phone.
We don't judge cars by the rev of an engine,
but by the hum of progress. We
are Generation E.
United.
Not by age,
but by the desire
for smart, clean, and safe.
To also be fun, easy,
and powerful.
And our power
comes from this.
Ultium.
A battery that charges fast.
Runs long. It fits everyone.
Because when it comes to this all-electric future,
nobody will be left out.
And that changes everything.
All right, so that was actually the newer commercial, which is much slicker than the next one we're going to watch. But that just gives you the sense of where the industry is today on how mainstream, let's just say, the appeal is to electrification, from all kinds of vehicles to all kinds of people. Let's watch a video from some years ago with a special guest.
Hello, I'm an electric.
And I'm socially responsible gasoline.
Documentary?
Advertising. Time to spend some money to look like I care too. Of course, I actually profit from destroying the planet, but with my billions, I am pumping up my green image. Line.
The Eagles.
The balding eagles will always have a home in our oil fields.
Cut! Bring in the face, please.
Oh. Looks like you're being replaced.
Yeah, so some people might not even recognize that dude. That's how old that commercial is.
Yeah.
But that was the can't believe it's not butter Fabio guy. And so that our ad was clearly targeted more towards a very specific audience. And so things have changed. So let's start with Katherine, since that was your organization's ad. I know you weren't responsible for it, but you're going to have to take credit for it.
How did you get Fabio?
They did a great job with those, I have to say. I mean, yeah, that's over a decade old at this point in time. And so the messages, and there's a whole series of those PSAs on the Plug in America YouTube site. But I mean, the messages that they were trying to get across there is about batteries being more efficient, addressing concerns about EVs catching on fire, national security messages. And I think that the target for most of those were some of the policymaker audiences and maybe the California Air Resources Board back in the day. But I think that most people understand now that, as we were saying, like, and with GM's announcement today too, that the future of transportation is electric. It's here. The technology is proven. The cars are out there. And so, in terms of the education and the messages, I mean, we're still trying to reach the sales funnel at the top, which is what Electrify America is doing. And they're doing a great job with that, trying to bring in customers at that top of that sales funnel. And now we're trying to address each of those pieces of the sales funnel and move down. And then utility is really at the critical key point here at the bottom of the sales funnel. And as Kellen mentioned too, that's where, that's where we need more education outreach here from the utility. I would also say that, we have 1.7 million EV drivers total on the road today but there is a total of 227 million total drivers in the US. And so, 1.7 million EV, 227 total US drivers on the road today. So we've got a long ways to go in terms of education, outreach, and awareness to get all of those 227 million drivers to be driving electric.
So we got a handful of questions coming in from our viewers. Let's pull up the second one from Alan here, and this is for you, Jamie, since we were just looking at one of your ads. This Alan's saying that he hasn't seen a ton of ads from the manufacturers. Do you want to comment on that and where you see GM going with investing in EV ads?
Sure. So I think you're going to see more and more going forward across the industry. And, we had ads in Super Bowl and World Series. So we're starting to do those bigger, splashier ads where a lot of the advertising and education outreach efforts have focused. And I think this is kind of logical if you think about that sales funnel is online. So, people are doing a ton of research online before they go and buy a car. And often they know exactly what they want when they go onto the dealer lot. They already know what the inventory is, and it's just down to haggling on price. So we had a lot of that, the advertising and sort of the education and outreach videos and whatnot is digital right now. And so I know personally, maybe given the fact that I work on EVs and my internet search habits, I am constantly bombarded by banner ads and videos and whatnot for all types of EVs, including, but not limited to GM vehicles. I guess one other point I'll make. So yeah, the industry and the market are maturing. So I think you've definitely seen that from that first video, which is a very sort of niche target audience, to the later video with sort of more celebrities and trying to talk more broadly. What hasn't changed is the fact that a lot of this is still not advertising, which is the kind of car ads that people are often talking about when they say they don't see much from industry. But education and outreach and answering these questions around, well, what does it mean to go electric? Could this actually work for me? Where would I plug in? We used to get questions like, can I drive in the rain? Electricity and water, what is this going to do to me? So a lot of the resources that we have are more in that education outreach, answering questions space. And we have something online that we call Bolt EV Academy. That's a series of 15 sort of short, easily shared videos answering these questions. One on home charging, one on, different types of charging away from home, one on how do I get a charger installed, one on how do I maximize my range in winter. And we also have a Chevy Living Electric website. And Nick, I think I have one image of that if you want to bring it up just as an example of some of the online resources that we have. So, if you go to Chevy's website and start to poke around, what does it mean to go electric and can this work for me? There are a lot of resources on there, from short, simple customer videos to walking through all the perks and incentives to talking about charging. So it is an interesting mix, and it's different, as I said, than traditional advertising because there's education that's going along here too. And education is not something you have to do in traditional advertising, and it's not really well suited to, a typical TV commercial that you'd see for a normal car. So that's why this I think looks a little different, and a lot of it's online where people are doing research and trying to answer questions.
We got another question that I think might be geared more towards you, Kellen, and that's on comparing the utilities' efforts to educate with the oil companies. And so, can you speak to that? Do oil companies and gas stations promote ICE vehicles? Is there like a real connection here, or do they not need to do that?
It's an interesting question, and this is where I've struggled, and I'm curious what the others on our podcast here think around promoting a generic fuel versus a particular vehicle. The big auto ads and Jamie just showed them for General Motors absolutely are going to promote a product and a brand and a lifestyle associated with that brand. It's difficult just conceptually to think about promoting the fuel. I mean, that's kind of with internal combustion engines, it's kind of the built-in infrastructure habit forming kind of, patterns that we have when we think about vehicles on the road. Oh, of course, I'm just going to go get gasoline. So it's difficult for us to kind of conceive conceptually how you generically promote a fuel. But I think one of the advantages is that when you think about the role of utilities versus car companies, the utilities generally will be kind of agnostic to brand, right? They don't really care about selling you a GM or a Audi or a Tesla. They just want you to have an electric vehicle, first of all, then have the ability to charge it, make sure you have the right rate and you're all set up from that standpoint. So I think that actually can be an advantage. We've seen some examples where some of our member companies, like in former KCP&L, now known as Evergy in Kansas City, set up a showroom, an actual physical space that they own in downtown Kansas City, where people can come in and talk about electric vehicles. They can test drive electric vehicles. And Evergy isn't trying to sell you a Nissan Leaf or a GM or whatever. They're trying to just get you interested in an electric vehicle. And I think that actually can take some of the pressure off of thinking about the brand and committing to a particular product, and more generically think about how does this fit in my life, and then go eventually purchase whatever car they want.
Yeah, I'm reminded of stories I used to hear about Southern Company, and they used to have showrooms for electric appliances and stuff, just because, obviously their interest was selling electrons. And so they would advertise those products. Didn't matter what brand it was, right? They just wanted people to plug things in. Katherine, do you have a take on Kellen's thoughts here? I also got another question for you too, if not.
About the oil companies and the gas stations promoting ICE vehicles. Yeah. I mean, I think what Kellen was saying too, well, if we look further back at the history of transportation, we had horses and buggies, and now we've got cars, but now we still have cars. It's the same product, but it's a different fuel type. Mm-hmm. And so, there hasn't been any other competition for oil and gas stations to need to market and promote what they offer. So that would be my answer there.
Okay. We got two questions for you now, Katherine. One is hopefully going to be a quick one, and it's on, is anyone... no, let's go to the other question. Yeah. Is anyone aware of EV expert certifications or trainings?
Yes. Yeah. And in terms of, I'm assuming that means getting at training the dealers. And so, yes, Plug in America, we have a program that's called PlugStar that trains up the dealers on how to sell EVs. And the reason that this is so important here about training dealers is that their business model as a dealer is really, it comes down to time is money. And so if they can sell you anything very quickly, they will. And so this is getting into a lot of different dealer issues, but for the most part, selling an EV right now, it takes time. You've got to explain all the various facets of the car to start off with, the battery, and then all the things about the charging, where to charge, how long it charges, like all of that. And that takes money. And so that's kind of why the dealers haven't thus far been really inclined to want to sell these vehicles. And then, of course, there's the other component about the maintenance and service part of it. But to address that, that's why we did create this PlugStar program to train up the dealers. And it's also, I should mention that it's available for e-learning. So all states can now, look into doing that, or any dealership around the country to address that. And I would say that some of the automakers too, they've done a great job of providing education for their dealerships as well. For example, BMW's done a good job with that, and Audi as well. And hopefully now we'll start to see, as GM making a big commitment today, and other automakers too, we'll see that training and resource provided back to the dealers there in terms of a certification or training program.
Let's go over to Jamie. I want to hear what your thoughts are on what Katherine was just saying, and then I'm going to turn another question from the audience over to you.
Sure. So yeah, we do a lot of dealer training on EVs, and I think you're going to see this ramp up as well when we get beyond the point where there are a few models and people are coming in occasionally asking about them, and this becomes more and more the mainstream product. Dealers are really going to remember everything in this training. They're going to get more and more customers asking questions. I think naturally they're going to become more and more experts on this technology because it's going to be more of what they talk about day to day. But I've participated in dealer trainings. And again, as Kellen said, the work that we do with our dealers is specific to our products. I think some of what Katherine's talking about is more of a broad education on EVs and incentives and whatnot, broadly speaking. And certainly there is room for both these things. But dealer training, clearly very important. Although, as I said, people are doing a lot of their research before they get to the dealership. And that's why we also spend an awful lot of time trying to catch people while they're online, figuring out what they want their next vehicle to be.
So let's show this other question, Peter, about charging. Yeah, great, thanks. I want to pick up first with you, Jamie, and then over to you, Katherine and/or Kellen. Is there a simple common denominator so the consumers and dealers can quickly, intuitively understand charging? I know there's some companies out there that are working towards simplifying this conceptually, but for a lot of people, charging, they'd like to think charging their car is as simple as charging their phone, and it's not, for the reasons Kellen has spelled out. But in a lot of cases, it could be in terms of the actual user experience. So why don't we start with Jamie on the OEM or the automaker perspective on this, and then we'll go to Katherine and Kellen.
Yeah, I mean, obviously charging is a little bit more complicated because you've got level 1 charging, level 2 charging, and DC fast charging. And so you need to help customers understand that these are 3 different things for to meet different needs. As I said, we try to explain all 3 of these pieces to people and help them understand where they can find access to charging in the public space, how they can get access to charging at home, ideally, if that's possible where they live. The thing that is hardest for us and our dealers to answer, and something that I think utilities are uniquely well suited to speak to, is what is it going to cost me to charge? Because the answer to that question varies across utility service territory, and it even varies based on the rate that you're on, and maybe, other habits that you have, and when in the day are you going to plug in, etc. But when it comes to the basics of how do I charge at home, how do I charge in the public space, I think there's room for all of us to educate people on that, and I think it's going to take a while, and we're going to have to keep doing it.
A really good point about price transparency, right? It's really complex for consumers because you've got so many different networks out there, so many different ways to charge. Katherine, Kellen, tell us a little bit about how you guys are just going to solve that for everyone.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, the industry has been trying to deal with this for a number of years, the various charging station providers. But that's a great question, Jeff, that you asked. I'm glad you put it in there, because that common denominator about understanding the charging language, I mean, that's something that early adopters are going to be fine understanding and dealing with. They can speak in kilowatt hours. They can talk about all those different terms. ISO 15118, things like that. But the mass market consumer here, which is now what we're moving into and transitioning into, they're not going to understand that at all. And so I would say that there is a platform out there that Plug in America supports. It's called the ChargeWay system, which is an easy labeling system for consumers to know, if you're charging on level 1, 2, and 3. There's different colors for that, for your adapters, and then different numbers associated with the speed. And that does really help to simplify the charging experience and understanding charging for the consumer. So I know now on the federal level with a new Congress, new administration, they're going to start to be looking at some of this labeling and different signage and just that common denominator, as you're talking about, Jeff, in your question there. So now is going to be the time to weigh in on all that and really set the standard for the mass market consumer adoption.
Kellen, you guys are good at standards.
I also think that the ChargeWay platform that Katherine mentioned is great. Trying to simplify, instead of kilowatts and different charging standards, just have simple numbers and colors. I think that's a good place to start. I think for our perspective, we really need to think about the needs of the customer and the use cases first before we try to get too far down the path of getting outside the home. And by that, I mean, I think that how I think about this is, from at least from the electric company's perspective, we need to have that critical foundational charging needs met. So for the customer, do you have a place where you park your car overnight? If you do, great. Let's figure out charging for that option, right? If you have, a garage, great. If you don't, if you're in a multi-unit dwelling, That's a little bit trickier, but let's work on solving that problem. We need long dwell overnight charging to be available to the vast majority of EV drivers. Second is workplace, right? In the before times, in the before pandemic, assuming we'll all go back to workplaces, that's the next most frequent place your car is parked. Let's solve that problem. And then if you have home and work covered, the rest of it is really just trying to skim the last like 10% of driving, right? Now, unfortunately, that's where a lot of people base their purchase decisions around, knowing they're going to do that trip 400 miles on a weekend out of, twice a year or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. That's the hardest problem of all of this to solve, and yet it's the one that I think we all get hung up on the most. And unfortunately, when we talk about charging infrastructure in the US, we usually pull up a map, right? And we show how many dots are there on the map, right? For the vast majority of driving, most of those dots are irrelevant to you. It's how do you do your daily driving needs? Do you have a place at home? Do you have a place at work? Cover the vast majority of your charging. And then how do we work together to solve that last kind of 10% of the problem? I completely agree that we need to figure out the communication around that to get people comfortable with that. But this is one of the primary challenges we're having, I think, in overcoming barriers to adoption here, is getting people to be comfortable with how they use these vehicles. And so they're not getting hung up on that last piece. Anyway, there's some quick thoughts there. I know we don't have all the answers, but it's a really interesting problem I'm trying to solve.
Hey, Nick, can I jump in with two other quick thoughts?
Sure.
One, so Kellen, agree, for those who have the ability to charge at home, the need to charge out in the public space is reduced. As we look to scale up to 100%, we're going to have to figure out solutions for people like me who live in an apartment or a rental or whatever it is, and might not have a garage and might not have the ability to charge at home. So scaling up that infrastructure in the public space, whether this is a corridor charging for the occasional road trip or clusters of DC fast chargers in metropolitan areas that people can use if they don't have charging at home will be really important. And maybe this is slightly out of scope, but one other thing automakers can do, it's not exactly, basic education about what is level 1 versus level 2 and how am I going to find a charger, is try to make this more seamless for customers. Once they have the vehicle, we integrate a lot of this information into the app so that you can use, an app on your phone to find that next charger and not have to worry about is this going to be a charger that's compatible with my vehicle or not, because automakers can kind of try to simplify this for you on the back end.
I was wondering if you were going to just make another announcement from GM when you're like, I'm going to go a little off topic, but no, it's okay.
Too much news for one day.
Yeah, tell me about it. Well, so we're a little over time, and I definitely appreciate everybody's conversation and questions from our audience here. And our guests were great. I learned quite a lot, even though I read that paper before we joined. And so I really want to thank Jamie, Kellen, and Katherine for joining us. You guys want to say anything before we close out on utilities and why they're essential? Why don't we start with Kellen?
Take a look at the paper. If you haven't, weighed in with your commission yet, the good news is a lot of the, almost every state now has taken on an issue, this really fun topic of regulating electric companies and how they engage in the electric transportation market, right? So the good news is if you haven't engaged yet, you have a chance to help shape this conversation likely in your state. And we encourage people to get engaged. Plug in America is so important for this effort as the voice of the EV driver to communicate what is actually really helpful. And the good news is of these proceedings is you can help shape the way these conversations go. Electric companies really want to serve the needs of the customer, and getting engaged is really important on that front.
Catherine.
Yeah, I mean, just like Kellen said, I mean, there's so much still in the paper that we didn't cover still. So I'd encourage you all to take a look and read through it. And also to the point about utilities, maybe I'll just highlight one point that we didn't cover necessarily, but about the utility targeting specific gaps in the marketplace. So for example, a lot of the low-income customers or rural customers, I mean, utilities all have relationships with those customers, whether they're, individual homeowners or apartment dwellers or whatever, or more on the corporate side too. So the utilities really have a great niche to play there that and great access to those customers that a lot of other stakeholders do not. So just encourage you to read the paper, and let's continue this conversation on education and outreach.
Right on. Jamie, feel free to make another announcement.
I guess what I'll say, I mean, we talked a little bit about at the beginning about this being the missing piece for electrification. I would characterize it a little bit differently. I think it is one piece, but we need everything. We need to build out the infrastructure. We're making progress there. We need better vehicles to come to market. We're making progress there. We need to make sure that electricity rates make sense such that people are saving money when they're charging at the right time of day. We're making progress there. But if customers don't understand all of this, then it doesn't really matter. So education and outreach is an essential piece of this overall puzzle. But we still have a lot of work to do on everything else as well. And so, Nick, it's not a new announcement, but for anyone who doesn't know, because I saw a question in the comment box about fast charge networks and sort of what is the role of automakers there. We have partnered with EVgo to expand the fast charging network around the country. So that, again, helps tell a better story for customers, but we all need to make sure that we tell them that story and that they realize that, hey, the map that Kellen talked about, more and more dots are appearing, and this is becoming more and more mainstream, and it can meet more people's needs.
Right on. Okay. Well, all that work that Jamie just laid out is why we're going to continue to have episodes of EV Hub Live. So I'd expect us to have another one in a few weeks. If folks have ideas for topics, feel free to send us a note directly at EV Hub's website or at atlaspolicy.com. Again, thanks for my guest for joining me on EV Hub Live. I'm Nick Nigro, your host, and signing off. Everyone stay safe out there, and we'll see you soon. Bye now.
Thanks.
Thank you.